welcome to Open Books with Alana and Erin, two female leaders modernizing the accounting and leadership space. So today, we are going to kind of follow up on a subject that we talked about a few podcasts ago when we talked about the specific traits that women bring into the leadership world. One of those traits was empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And empathy, though, has a role within leadership, male or female or whatever you may be. There's definitely a role for empathy in the leadership world. So we're going to explore that a little bit more today, talk about the pros and cons of empathy, and then also talk about how a leader can help develop empathy.
Yep.
Which will be great. So to start it off, how do you think, Erin, that empathy can be used within servant leadership?
So it is one of the best ways that a leader can build trust. You acknowledge your team members' feelings, what they're experiencing at the time, acknowledging that verbally with them and identifying things that can relate to yourself, I think just helps really build that trust. And that can't be... the importance of that can't be downplayed.
Yeah.
Servant leaders, we are wanting to provide the support and everything that we can for our employees to be successful. And understanding where they're coming from is a huge step in that direction. They are going to be more open. Hopefully, it's a more transparent relationship. But I really think so much of it is just understanding where they're coming from. Yep. They recognize that and they give that empathy back. They're understanding where I'm coming from when we have conversations. So I think it just builds that kind of two-way street of understanding, and we are all working for the betterment. Mistakes happens,
Yep.
but we're still all working together. What would you say is the best thing about empathy?
Yeah, I would echo what you said. I also think empathy very much develops that trust, not only just the connection and the transparency, but really starts to build that foundation of trust with the team member. Because like you said, you're getting to know the team member, where they're coming from, what drives them, providing that sense of support to them. And in those moments, I think you're really creating trust with that team member. And servant leadership, like we've talked about time and time again, is very much like one of the core fundamentals is trust with the team member.
I think there's also a part of building that trust, especially when you're looking at building up future team leads.
Yeah.
You're starting them out on this, hey, two-way street. We're both having this conversation. We're both empathizing with each other. Yeah. We'll talk about some boundaries and stuff that need to be in place in the future. But I feel like starting off with people that you want to potentially lead in the future, you're showing that by example. They see it, they're going to do it with their team, and just builds this web of trust that can really elevate your team and your performance and the success of everyone in the firm.
Yep. Yeah, I think you're essentially giving that grace to someone. And I think when they feel that, then they model it.
Totally.
Because it feels accepted, as opposed to having to take it out on another team member, if you pass down that frustration to someone. So definitely, I think empathy and grace go hand in hand.
Yeah. I love that. I always forget the giving someone grace, but it's so true. And just understanding where they're coming from, putting ourselves in their shoes makes such a connection, I think.
It does. Yeah.
And actually verbalizing it so that you're acknowledging hey, I've thought this through. This is how this would affect me. This is how I expect it's affecting you. How do you feel? And just creating that bond is so important and can really be that solid foundation of the relationship.
Yep, it totally can. With that, though, at the beginning of the episode, we talked about how empathy, and you mentioned you have to have some boundaries in place, right? So how do you see empathy being somewhat of a double-edged sword?
So I am 100% guilty of letting empathy drive conversations that need to be handled a little more objectively. I think when things happen, mistakes happen, which we're all human.
Yeah.
We're all going to make mistakes. But when things happen, I start extrapolating in my mind what could have happened, what they were thinking, putting myself in their shoes too much to the point where I'm coming up with excuses and reasonings. And so I really have to set boundaries with myself to be like, yes, I can put myself in their shoes, but also I can't give excuses for why things have happened. I can be understanding about things, but we are still a business. We still need to make sure that we're doing things appropriately. So sometimes it's going to be hard conversations, but even in those conversations, I think acknowledging like, hey, I understand where you're coming from with this conversation or this instance, verbalizing that we've thought through it from their perspective is a way to kind of still put yourself in their shoes, but also take that step back and realize, okay, I'm driving too deep into this. I really need to pull back. Personally, that is something that I have to work on. I'm so bad at it. A little bit too much empathy. What's the double edge for you?
Yeah, I think empathy and accountability have to very much be balanced, or they both have to be present in a situation.
Yes.
At least in the professional world, I think, especially when it's a manager and leader, team member type of dynamic. Because like you said, when you do have so much empathy for your team members and, really know what they're going through, it can be easy and a slippery slope to really start those excuses, and not providing accountability in that moment. And I think part of being empathetic is providing accountability, because you can understand how somebody got there or why they're feeling a certain way. And then with accountability, you can help them, change the course or develop a new solution. So I think sometimes accountability gets a bad rap in the sense of like, maybe it's like a discipline form. I don't think it is. I actually think accountability is a very helpful tool, and is really just another layer on empathy.
Yeah.
But you have to have both.
For sure. Accountability is such a kind of a sticky, not concept, but like you have to hold people accountable, but there's also understanding, were they set up for failure from the beginning? That may be the case, but we still need to recognize like there are still steps that we can do to improve where we're at. You may have been given a shoebox full of receipts, but like there are better ways to handle things, and using that accountability is only going to help that person grow, which means they're going to be able to handle more in their career as things come up. Being empathetic alone is okay, but with the accountability, I think it really shows its strength. Yeah,
and I think because you're empathetic, you can have accountability because you can reason with the team member, and it's like, yes, where we're at sucks. I understand why you feel that way. What can you do to change it? Like, what's in your control, and let's do it. So I think, accountability is actually a form of being empathetic for your team member.
Yeah. It's going to better them in the long run, or they're going to feel better in the long run.
For sure.
So it really is, all leads back to that providing support and providing a safe space for our teams.
Yep, totally.
Accountability is such, I'm so bad at just the excuse part. It's like, it's going to, we'll talk about it later as well. It's what have I learned from my team members? I make too many excuses for them.
But we've talked about that too in a prior episode of like, when we do give our team members excuses, are we hindering that growth a little bit too, right? And so that is where accountability, even for ourselves, comes in of like, okay, I have to be accountable to them in this moment too, and provide accountability to
Definitely.
them. Yep.
That's what my mentor does for me. Like, set those boundaries.
Yes, huge. That's huge. Yep. How do you think a leader can work to develop the skill or the attribute of empathy?
So we've talked about this before, as you mentioned at the beginning of the episode, when we spoke about women and their kind of knack for servant leadership, because many of them are already empathetic. I think women are taught from a very early age to put other people's needs before our own. So we are used to having to put ourselves aside and think about things from a different perspective. So even though women have I think a little bit of a step up,
In life.
I mean, yes, in general.
Yes.
I think there are ways to develop and work on creating that empathy or building that habit inside of yourself. And it's really taking yourself out. Like, okay, we have a situation, take yourself out, think about that other person. What do they have going on? What is maybe affecting their work life? Like, just removing self. And I think that's really hard. Again, maybe a little bit easier for women because we're used to taking the self out. But that at least starts you thinking about someone else. And I think that for me is like the first step. Thinking about someone else and what they're going through, and then being able to take that, empathize, sympathize with it, kind of understanding where they're coming from. So I see that as what I would say is the first step in development, and then more on. But what would you say?
Well, and to your point, I don't know if we've talked about it before, but we should do an episode on ego in leadership, because what you're describing is very much taking the self out, taking your ego out of the situation. And so I think that would be a really interesting follow-up to do for sure. Anyway, okay. But how I think a leader can develop empathy, I would totally agree with what you've said. I also think part of being empathetic is being fully present in a situation. And so I just don't think you can be empathetic and be halfway distracted, because you're really trying to understand where that person is coming from and listen to what they have to say and support them in that moment. So I really think, like, if somebody is like, I need to work on empathy, the first thing you can do is just make sure you're fully present with someone, practice active listening, and then also starting to really lean on those powerful questions that we talked about a couple episodes ago. Because with the fully present and asking powerful questions, you're starting to build that connection with the team member and really starting to understand why they feel a certain way and where they're coming from.
Yeah, I love that, removing distractions. We have Slack, Teams, email, calendar notifications going off all the time. And by silencing those or do not disturb for a half hour while you have this meeting with your team member, and making sure that they also have the distractions down, lets you have such a better conversation, and you can be present and have them be present too. So you're both giving all of your attention to each other. Is like, that is key. I love that. Love that you brought it up, because we so often just like let the distractions happen. And then the other person across the way, like, they may have distractions too, but they're also seeing you look over to the side, like, oh, I have this Slack notification, I need to pay attention to that. So really being there and on and for them
is huge.
Yeah, definitely a good starting place too. Habit to build.
Totally. So I'm in person with some team members, and this is my office. For those of you who don't know, we film in my office. And when people come in and need to talk, I physically walk away from my computer and just sit with them. And I don't bring, my tablet or my phone or anything, just because I think it's so important that I'm not kind of like side-eyeing my email in those moments. So that's something you can do in person.
For my team, I will start, I have been very bad. I'm bad at a lot of stuff. This is a learning journey for me.
Learning in public.
Yeah, great. No ego here, let me tell you. But I have now started, like, verbally noting that, I need to turn off my notifications on
Yeah.
Slack so that other people will
Yep.
hear that and think of doing it themselves or know that it's okay. I think with Slack and Teams, there's a bit of an expectation that responses are quick and fast. And I don't know if everyone on the team, in the team, when they're on a call, is comfortable turning off the notifications. Like they may think that they need to respond. So I do try to verbalize it. Like, okay, or if one comes in, I'll be like, I thought I did not disturb. I'm going to do that right now.
Yep.
So that they know I'm doing that. So they should hopefully feel comfortable enough to do it themselves.
Because I think even the sound, I
yeah.
noticed, like, even if I'm in a meeting and even the sound comes through, like, if I'm talking with somebody and I hear the sound, I'm like, oh, they've got stuff to do, you know? So even just the sound can start to, like, create that distance or the, like, hurry up effect. Even if you're not diving into the conversation that came in, I think just the sound alone, we all know the sounds.
Yeah.
The sound alone will start to make the meeting wrap up, is what I've noticed.
Also, the sound I have found, even if it's not on my computer, it's on someone else's, it triggers
Yep.
I need to go look at that. And so I will totally lose track of what I'm saying. Even though it's not my notification, it's just the sound. And I'm like, no, refocus. What was I saying? I don't even know now. So by encouraging your team to do it and doing it yourself, I think is so important. That being present really is so important. And I really don't think it gets enough space
for
if that
sure
makes sense.
And not even just an empathy, right? But just being present is so often overlooked, I think. And it's so important with so many things, whether you're remote or in person. There's various ways to be present in both situations, right? But being present is really important. And I just think we don't have much of it in today's world.
So. Do not disturb. Pause notifications.
Forever.
I was going to say, like, I have an option of an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours. I'm like, what if I just did
forever?
Yeah. I never need a notification.
Yeah, exactly.
I miss everything. Would not be too great.
Funny. So what is something that you've learned about empathy from a team member or a mentor?
So as mentioned, I like to create excuses for my team when it comes to things like client service failures. And I have learned that it is detrimental to them. It puts uncertainness there, because then I'm coming up with these excuses and they may be like, it wasn't that at all. Like, don't put words in my mouth. But so I've learned that I really need to step back, let them say their piece, put my, like, I'm in their shoes on, but I need to stop my absolutely crazy thoughts from just like coming up with all of this stuff. Because it really does not do any good for them or for me. That's the biggest thing. As we were prepping for this episode, I'm just like, man, another episode where I have to expose myself. But that's what I've learned that I need to work on. And the accountability side of things is really being accountable to myself, that I'm not going to make excuses for people. What is happening is happening. I can understand, but I don't need to put words or actions in people's mouths or hands, I suppose.
For sure.
Oof. How about you?
So I have very much taken, I would say, like a core element of my leadership style from one of my mentors. And I describe it as empathetic with boundaries. And that's something I remind myself a lot when I am starting to fall down the slippery slope of too many excuses, or I'm not going to bring it up now because, they're going through this.
That's
that
the
one
worst.
gets me. I know. Or like, I just want them to have a really good day today. I'm not going to say anything, so when I find myself starting to think like that, I just try to remind myself, like, back to the core of what I'm really trying to model in my leadership, of just that empathetic with boundaries.
Oh, that's what I need to remember.
It's hard,
We
though.
need to do like a weekly therapy session for me to talk to you about all the
we need it. Yeah.
the boundaries I've
Yeah.
not set for myself.
Oh,
But
man.
it's so true. Having
know.
it's so important. And it's for their own, like, we aren't helping
No.
by empathizing way beyond what we should be.
Totally. And
It's really not helpful for anyone.
it's not. Well, and in your example, we have to step into their shoes, not like their brain, right? Like,
Yes.
we still have to maintain that distance so that they can still, grow much like we grew.
Yeah.
So
Ah,
I
definitely.
know it's hard though.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. What's something you would tell yourself way back when in regards to empathy?
So I would say this probably started when I was pretty young. My parents were definitely like pretty strict. I used to paint the fence as a punishment.
Get out of here.
Did you too? It must
Paint
be an
the fence,
Idaho thing.
Stack the wood,
Stain the
One-
deck.
please. Yes.
Polish
Yes.
a boat that had a hole
Vivid
in the
memories
bottom.
of chucking wood. Wait, what? What was yours?
I had to like polish a boat that had a hole in the bottom of it. I love my parents.
Love you.
So have always had a pretty strict parents. And they were, I mean, both of my, I love my parents. Don't get me
Yes.
wrong. They are very, they are both computer people. If that gives you an idea of like fairly analytical.
Yep.
My mom's a business analyst. So my
Yep.
dad was a software programmer, very objective, analytical. And so I always was never like empathy is not a good, it's not
Yeah.
a good thing.
Yep.
Like you just want to get that out. So, and I've always considered it a bit of a weakness. Because it wasn't something that we really talked about
Mm-hmm.
growing up. Some of my first jobs were with managers that were very black and white,
Yeah.
and there was no gray, no empathy. It was you either do this or you. I was about to say you do it or you die, but obviously you do it or you're fired.
Yeah.
So, and I think that all really made empathy as this bad thing that you shouldn't have. It's a weakness if you feel this way, if you try to understand. And I would tell myself,
Yeah.
like, that is not the case.
Yep.
It is a strength.
Yep.
Yes, it can be a double-edged sword. You need some boundaries, some parameters,
Yeah.
but it isn't the weakness you think it is. And not the like the people that were managing me before or my parents were bad or
Yeah.
anything. It's just, it was very black and white
Yep.
without that personal feeling. And I am a very like emotional person.
Yeah.
So, I took them not being empathetic and
You did.
immediately took it as like, oh, that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
So I would probably go back to me being like in high school or something and being like, hey,
Yep.
empathy's okay. It's
Totally.
good.
Yep.
Lean into it.
It
It's
it
all
is.
right.
Yeah, it's powerful.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that.
So I went way, way back.
Yeah.
How about you? What would you tell yourself?
Yeah, I won't
Ago.
go all the way back to high school, but the beginning of my career, I would tell myself just that empathy can be demonstrated between colleagues. It's not just like a leader team member type of dynamic. And so you can create those relationships and, be empathetic with your colleague or there's just so many ways it can show up. And like we talked about earlier, just that grace for other
Yeah.
people that you're working with, even clients
Mhm.
or other vendors, right? Just providing that empathy, I think, is really important just
Yeah.
in any relationship, business, personal,
Yeah.
whatever it might be.
I would tack on to that empathy in general when
Yeah.
you're out in the public.
Oh, yes.
Like, let's please be empathetic, you
Yes.
guys. There's
Yep.
no reason that we should be yelling at
No.
a person trying to do their job.
Totally.
There's
No.
so much disruption, I think,
Yeah.
happening, and it's from a lot of lack of empathy.
Totally.
Like, put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah.
Understand what no one is trying to purposefully do a
Yes.
bad job.
Yes.
Right?
No, completely.
Maybe one person out there. They're in the vast minority
Minority.
if they're trying to do a bad job.
Nobody's waking up and saying, like, I'm royally going to F everyone
Yeah.
up today. Like,
Yeah. Totally.
the general public is just not
Yeah.
thinking that.
Yeah.
80-20 rule, right? 80% of
Yes.
people are really great.
Yes. There's the small group. But if we all had a bit more empathy
Yeah.
to each other, I really think we could make changes. It's
It's so powerful.
not just for your professional relationships, your team, out in public.
Yes.
Let's be empathetic.
Let's be nice.
Yes.
Be nice, be kind.
Okay, I'm going to tell, I have a sticker. This may not be appropriate for podcasts. We can cut it if
We
you
can
need
cut
to.
it if maybe not.
Have a sticker that says, be kind of a bitch. So it does not follow what we're trying to say, but it's pretty funny.
Yeah, that doesn't help, but that's very funny. I like that. All right, well, thanks.
Yeah, you bet.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning into Open Books. We aim to share insights gained from our past and previous experiences to foster growth within the accounting and leadership communities. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.